Hi, Alex. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, certainly. My name is Alex Lee. I am the Democratic candidate for Assembly District 25, which encompasses the cities of Santa Clara, North San Jose, Milpitas, Fremont, and Newark, which has a lot of overlap with Supervisor District 3, actually, in Santa Clara County. I am also, if elected, I would be the youngest Assembly member in the state since 1938. I would also be the first openly bisexual candidate.
Mhm.
And also, I'm hometown boy here. I grew up here in Milpitas and San Jose, so I have a very strong hometown connection. And in addition to that, uh, I also worked in the state assembly and the state senate as a legislative staffer, so I have a lot of direct experience.
Uh-huh.
And met Otto through, the trail of campaigning, and now I'm happy to be on, your interview show.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Alex, and it's really an honor and pleasure to have you here during this tough times. So, just thinking ahead a little bit, right?
Mhm.
So, when this public health crisis is behind us in the next few weeks, or hopefully in few
Hopefully.
weeks, what do you think our younger Americans would be hoping to see as change? For example, what do you think in healthcare, maybe workers' rights, or some type of community programs?
Hmm.
I think will be needed. Mhm.
Yeah, certainly. I don't know if you've seen these things on the internet and memes even, but
Mhm.
our generation, the younger generation, whether you're millennial or Gen Z, how you identify right now, is we're experiencing the second once in a generational, economic big recession in
Right.
our lifetime, right? And while this one is caused primarily by a global health pandemic, I think we are going to be looking for a lot of strong changes. We're also in the presidential election cycle, so naturally all those issues are already at forefront. And really, my goal is when I get to the assembly, as well as be advocating a lot for more common sense reform to our healthcare system,
Mhm.
to our
Right.
worker rights. A big thing I think it's revealed by this global health pandemic is how much we really need to be advocating for healthcare access for everyone.
Mhm.
I'm sure you've probably heard the stories too about people just almost having to pay thousands of dollars just to get tested, or
Right.
people dying because they don't have coverage in California.
Right.
And so I really think that we need to be fighting for universal healthcare coverage in the state,
Mhm.
as well as making sure that people aren't losing their basic, you know, think of the word, their basic rights to healthcare or things like housing as well. And I'm sure you've seen this at the county level and at the city level, that discussion of such a pandemic of this scale has put so many people at risk of losing their home. Either they own or they rent, either way. And I'm
Right.
going to be fighting for a lot of those issues to make sure that people still can afford to keep their homes, as well as, afford homes of their own if they have to.
And if you have also seen our Congresswoman Katie Porter from
Hmm.
Southern California has actually about a month and a half ago, during a congressional hearing, has discussed this very issue with the leading secretaries of the House and Human
Yeah.
Services, and basically was able to get our leaders in the federal government to basically state that our federal government will be paying for any type of testing related to COVID-19.
Hmm.
So I know people who have to get the testing done, the money has been paid out of pocket, but
Hmm.
it's only so important to make sure that
Oh
if the
yeah.
government is supposed to pay for this, as this been
Hmm.
promised by our leaders, to make sure that folks like that who have out-of-pocket expenses to get that reimbursement done. I
Oh,
think as
certainly.
with the leader at the different county or state level, we need to make sure that these resources and this information is being able to be provided to our residents and make sure that people don't hold back getting tested if they need to be, just for fear of having to make these type of expenses. Because at the end of the day, if people are not tested, and that's actually one of the biggest problems we have, is we're so
We're
low
under tested.
number of testing under. And until we've got the number of testing available, honestly, it's going to be very hard to really open up our communities that we are all looking so forward to as soon as possible. So I think it's something that is so crucial that our county is working hand in hand with state and the
Mhm.
federal government
Yeah.
to make sure that those resources are made available to our general community.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, as you know, our community has a very large and strong Asian community background. as diverse as we are, there are only a few Asian Americans that are elected, especially locally.
Hmm.
How do you think your background and your own story would help influence your decision making? And what do you think your election would mean to your family and to your community?
Yeah, yeah. Well, certainly, if we do win in November, it would be several historic records, I think. As the first bisexual legislator, as the first, well, the youngest legislator as an Asian American as well. I think there's a lot of firsts, but what really matters to me is someone who actually, it's a different background, right? Whether you're a first generation or a second generation or third generation as it goes on, immigrant to America is a lot of different contextual things to your life, right? So for me personally, my family immigrated here from Hong Kong in the 90s.
Same as
Yes,
me.
90s. Yes. Well, that generation, right? So I'm the generation of your kids then, who grew up here in the culture shift of where, and I think California and the country started to assimilate and figure out what is the Asian American identity, more broadly speaking, right? I think our generation has a little different take on it because we don't have that context. Think back, direct reference to what it was like in Hong Kong or what it was like in the origin country.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of difference there. But I think I will have a very strong conscientiousness about taking all the context that happened, especially in our area, in our state. So many different generations of Asian Americans have come here, people who have built, literal settlement towns with the first settlers as well, who came all the way from the East Coast, and people who founded the tech boom as well, right? Very different experiences, but still contributions of our people. And I want to use that kind of shared experience to inform my policymaking as an Asian American. So in
Mhm.
Assembly District 25, there's about almost 1 in 2 voters are of Asian descent.
Well,
1 in 2, almost half. Yeah. I mean,
mhm.
of course, this is Pan-Asian, right? South Asian, Pacific Islander, East Asian.
Right.
This is a whole different tangent, right? The way United States categorizes Asian is pretty broad, but
Right.
almost half of of the population of my district is Asian. In fact, my district is the only Northern California district with the plurality Asian.
Correct.
I shouldn't say majority because it's only 40 something percent.
Right.
Um, but I think it's very important in that regard, right? Because we don't have a lot of representatives who share these identities. I think that I have, as well as being queer, being Asian, being young. All these things inform my kind of ideology. And
Right.
hearing from a lot of people from all these different communities, right?
Mm.
That
Correct.
that kind of representation really matters to them, because at
Right.
the end of the day, we have to be making laws that are best for the people of California, for our South Bay community.
Mhm.
And I'm going to be doing that, especially since I grew up in this area, and so I have a lot of this identities informed, right? And I think sidestep a little bit, I think my family is pretty proud that I pulled off this historic victory as well. They're pretty relieved, and I'm glad they believed in me from the beginning.
Mhm.
It's not easy when typically the stereotype, right? The stereotype is that Asian families want you to get a steady career in medicine or law or something, and my mom did want me to be a doctor, but then I didn't do very well in biology and stuff. So I said I would
Me
never
neither.
be a good doctor. Yeah, exactly. Right? I wouldn't be a very good doctor to begin with. But my passion is in helping others, and if it's not in healing others, it's going to be making sure there's resources so people can heal in the communities.
Exactly. Right. Absolutely. On the kind of a sad note, right, with the most recent attacks due to
Mm-hmm.
they call it some the Chinese virus, and a lot of people from Asian descent are now experiencing some type of hate crime like issues where they walk to the grocery store, walk down the
Yeah.
street, and some are even afraid of potential hate crimes to our Asian and Chinese residents since this outbreak. Um, would like to share with you what have you learned about these issues, and what are you planning to do that you could help strengthen the laws to make sure that our communities are protected.
Yeah, certainly. I think certainly the uptick in racism and hate speech and even hate crimes that have come as a result of this pandemic are honestly very disgusting. I mean, these are things that, I mean, I'm sure you agree, have always been existing in America, right? California was the origin of the Chinese Exclusion Act,
Mhm.
up until 1943,
Mhm.
43. And we always have had that undercurrent of racism, right? But now it's taken an ugly turn because people in the White House deem it enough to call it a Chinese virus, and they think that's politically correct to do so. And people are pinning a lot of blame, I think, unfairly on Asian Americans, whether you be Chinese or not. And I think it's feeding into the most
Mhm.
base and ugly undercurrents that exist in this country. But it can't be denied that there's that easy scapegoat, right? People, I think, when they're uncertain and when there's a lack of leadership, especially at the federal level, I think, especially from the president, people want to see what is the solution, right? What is the scapegoat? And Asian Americans at this time provide an easy scapegoat to people. And I'm very disappointed in that. And, I know a lot of people personally who actually have encounters, even here in the Bay Area, in the South Bay, that have very nasty encounters when they go out for essential services or they go out for get groceries. People, I think the other day I had a friend who was just walking down the street, I think from the grocery store, and someone across the street said, "Don't get me infected with coronavirus." It's just insane, just how it's happening. And I think people have every right to
Mhm.
be frustrated, but not to take it out on your other human beings, right? I mean, this virus, it doesn't discriminate on your race, doesn't discriminate on your age or your wealth. I mean, it's ugly, right? It's racist violence in all its forms. And unfortunately, I think really the only way to combat this is not through violence, the ugly ways. It's really to shed light, to tell the truth thing. This is what the virus is. This is how it's transmitted. Doesn't discriminate against races or isn't carried specifically by certain people either, and I think showing that light, my hope at least, is the way to cure racism and cure these evils. But there are always going to be, I think, these fears that exist in society, and I don't blame the people in our community for feeling unsafe, but
Right.
I think it's going to be incumbent upon people like us who have public platforms to discount all these things, especially when people do it in government or do it out of government, to just say, like, this is wrong for XYZ. You should play the facts, right? I'm always a big person in giving people a second chance. If you said something racist, I'm going to give you the truth, and that's your second chance, and hopefully you correct yourself. But it's going to be tough, I think, and it's our responsibility, I think, in elected office to constantly speak the truth to it and not appeal to that base, right? It's too tempting, I think, for so many different reasons, and that's never something I'm going to stoop to.
Good, good. Thank you. Now, along the line, in terms of where we are in terms of the November election, obviously, it's a few months, almost half a year out to the November election. Nobody really knows how that would be affected. What do you see would be the challenges to voting this November in terms of connecting to our voters? Because I do know that one of your biggest accomplishment during this primary election was that you have knocked on how many doors?
Yeah, during the primary, we knocked on probably over close to 30,000 doors.
30,000 doors.
Yeah,
That's
it's
a lot.
probably
Yes.
yeah.
So do you see that changing, given the
Oh,
fact that, a lot of us
unfortunately.
are in place and, yeah. So what do you think?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be able to do another 30,000 like I plan to do. I think everything really depends on where we're at coming closer and closer to these next months, right? I really don't think personally that we're going to be able to resume as we did in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly the way things are going to be different, right? For many different reasons. And I think what's important when it comes to campaigning and people who are doing campaigning is it's important to be appropriate and sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
There is a global health pandemic where people are literally struggling to make rent or even buy groceries right now. And I don't want to be another additional burden on people, thinking about what all these other things when people have a lot of other things pressing in the near term to think about. But it's also important, and what I also emphasize to people, while we still do politics now, is it shows how important it is to have competent leadership in office for these times, right? And whether you're prepared to think about it or not, come November, we have to, as a whole country, decide who will lead the entire country, our state, our counties, because they will be ultimately the people leading the next response, right? The economic response, the health response, and that's why it's so important. So I think, it's threading the needle of how to be appropriate and conscientious talking to people, and then how to also tell them that's important, right? Because in this country, thankfully, we have the right to say, these are the people we want to lead us through the next crisis and how we want to do it, right? But we can't forget that. So I'm looking a lot at, my brothers and sisters campaigning out in the East Coast and in special elections across this country who unfortunately must, contend with this question much earlier. But I think a lot of it's going to be respectfully campaigning from a distance, right? So it's phone calling, texting, letter writing, maybe, I don't know. We're figuring out new things, and a lot of even digital campaign like this. I've seen a lot of successful house parties, virtual house parties, and maybe we can do a lot more of that. But I think we're embarking on a new frontier in many regards. So yeah. How do you think your campaign is going to be like in the rest of 2020?
It's going to be, like you said, very different in terms of the traditional door knocking, and hopefully maybe later in the year when things seems to calm down. Again, it really depends on whether or not there's going to be a relapse
Yeah.
of the virus in the fall, right? Because
Yeah.
there's been some expectation that by summer months, with the weather warming up and more humidity, potentially the virus might, die down, hopefully,
Hmm.
from there onwards. But if there is some type of a relapse or spike up again, say in the fall, I think that would completely change the whole dynamics of people's
Yeah.
person-to-person contact. And if we have to go back to not even the shelter in place, but we have to limit our contact, having to still wear masks, for example, it just makes the whole person contact so different, right? I mean, you can't imagine people going around knocking on doors wearing a mask, right? It's just
Yeah, I think that would freak some people out.
not just
Yeah,
work,
a
right?
little bit.
Exactly. So, and I think we certainly have a lot of community that need help.
Mhm.
Still, obviously, I still remind people that the second Harvest Food Bank is still
Yes.
very much accepting donations. I recall we were out there
Mhm.
about a month ago to help sort apples, for example, or help distribute groceries, and even the American Red Cross absolutely are still have dire needs of more blood donations, and let people know that blood donations is a perfectly safe activity. You can go out. You're not
Yes.
forced to go shelter in place. What you should do is make an appointment with the Red Cross that you're coming
Yes.
to do that, and go out there and actually get a few friends to go with you. Of course, remaining the 6 feet safe distance, wear a mask. But this is how we can still contribute tremendously to our community every day, right?
Yeah, yeah, certainly. And I definitely think volunteerism is something, if you're able to, right, and you don't put other people at risk, that's the most important thing, right? If you're
Absolutely.
able to do so is incredibly helpful now. There's so much need, and if plugging for any viewers or yourself, if you can donate blood, please donate it on my behalf because I cannot actually donate still under current FDA guidelines. That's a whole other story, how
Right.
draconian they are about limiting who and how they discriminate people. But,
Right.
I've also been very active with, an informal coalition of nonprofits right now in San Jose to help with unhoused folks.
Yes.
So I'm on a team that we've actually packed more than 1,000 supply kits, I think, for unhoused people. It's got food, COVID information,
Mhm.
hygiene materials, and that's really important for this population, right, who are very at risk. And
Right.
I'm glad, I think just the other day, Governor Newsom finally announced there's a deal to work with some motels to get some people housed, because these people are very vulnerable. Because one, we're already hearing is that a lot of the services they rely on are closing, right? So they can't access that. And if
That's
you
right.
can't charge your phone, how can you access public health information? So I'm working with a lot of great advocates who are getting these supplies out, very much needed supplies out to people, masks, things that clean their hands with,
Right.
because we are really concerned about people who don't have a shelter to shelter in place with necessarily,
Right.
because you don't want any person to be left behind in this pandemic. So I'm very grateful to be working with that. But also plug is, if anyone watching this has donations of hand sanitizer, like personal bottles of sanitizer, we are running low on that. So would always love that kind of support too, because I'm working with a lot of groups to get that too.
Absolutely. Yeah. So personal protective equipment, of course, is
Mm-hmm.
something that's very short. And I do want to also extend the fact that, other things like you said, chargers or ways to help
Yeah.
people charge their phone. These are things that is very much in need right now as well. So let's make sure we get the word out and for people
Yeah.
to donate. So besides money and cash, there are
Yeah.
many other ways you could help
Many, many ways.
the community. Absolutely. Great.
Yeah.
Well, Alex, I think we're running out of time today, but it's been wonderful to see you doing well, and stay healthy and keep up your great work. And we're looking forward to talking to you and seeing you more. Hopefully, after this shelter in place is over, we could meet in person and have another one of these interviews.
Looking forward to it too. Looking
Great.
forward to it too. Thanks, Otto.
All
Stay
right.
safe.
Take care, Alex. Take care.
Bye.
Bye now. Thanks.